Hello, brothers and sisters. I'm your host and presenter, Agentic Stories. This is a topic that I want us to talk about. I'm sorry for not showing myself today because of the place that I am, but I believe that what I'm saying is the thing that is important as compared to seeing me. So, white deflection has been a topic of discussion for the longest time, and it really pains and it's really unfair getting to hear someone talk about how they are not responsible for the things that their ancestors did, yet you understand that they benefited from this structure. They benefited from this structure that humiliated, that dehumanized black people. And so they are trying to deny something that they should be taking accountability for. And this brings us to our today's discussion, what is called white deflection. They are always trying to deflect from this reality. They are always trying to deflect from this truth because they don't want to be guilty. And this is a self-adjustment mechanism that they have to deflect from the realities of understanding the devastating factors or the devastating effects that slavery came up with. Brothers and sisters, I'm going to let you watch this video and then I'll be back. I'll be sharing my thoughts in regards to this. So let's watch the video. I'll be back, brothers and sisters.
Why does a person that never was a slave deserve compensation from a person that never owned a slave?
How many more times is it my fault? Is it my grandkids' fault too? Is it my grandkids' fault too?
Your fault. Yeah.
It is. I mean, I'm just saying generationally, I understand it's about equality and like, hey, these certain people were oppressed. You could
A lot of white people who feel guilty about slavery really need to humble themselves because respectfully, many of you come from a long lineage of broke people of poverty who couldn't even afford a slave if they wanted to. This is just another reason why when white people talk about white privilege, it's really disrespectful because white supremacy inherently means black inferiority. And the privileges that you will find in a country like America typically comes from money.
As a person that never was a slave deserve compensation from a person that never owned a slave?
The fact that this question is coming from a person of color makes this all the more despicable. But since you've shown the world how little you know about history and finances in this country, let me help you out just a little bit. And you don't need a college education to know this, maybe high school at the very least. You ready? The same way that generational wealth can be passed down through generations, generational debt can also be passed down through generations. If the descendants of slave owners who created these multi-billion-dollar financial institutions off of the free, back-breaking, unending 4 centuries, 12 to 16 generations of chattel slavery is still benefiting from that wealth today in 2025, then why shouldn't the descendants of those slaves be able to have the debt paid to them that was never paid to their ancestors? It doesn't matter if the people now didn't own the slaves. What matters is that they are still benefiting from the wealth that was created because of those slaves who were never paid. Do you understand that? This is not rocket science, my friend. It's common sense, and clearly you're showing the world that you're void of it. And I'm not really sure what you're hoping to get out of this, but if you think your pandering pick-me-ass behavior is going to get those same descendants of that generational wealth to give you a few dollars, then you have truly lost your mind. You will never be picked. You will never be in the situation that black people are in today to be owed that generational debt. Because your ancestors, unless you are the descendants of African slaves, did not survive these horrific atrocities.
So you really thought slavery ended in 1865? Be so for real. Slavery continued well into the 60s for black Americans under something called peonage. Let's get into it. And before you get upset with me, you can research it yourself. These are not my personal opinions, these are fact. Slavery was abolished with the 13th Amendment, yes, but there is a clause that states it's illegal except for punishment of a crime. So you already know what happened next. Black people got arrested for anything. Vagrancy, not having a job, talking back, you name it. They were leased to plantations, railroad, and mines under something called convict leasing. And even folks that weren't arrested got trapped into the system of peonage. A white landowner or a farm owner could say, hey, you owe me for that mule I let you borrow or that tool I let you use. And next thing you know, you're trapped in this endless debt. And every time you think you've paid it off, the bar has been moved a little bit further. And it's another year on the farm. And this was happening throughout the 1900s up until the 60s, especially in places like Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi. Some people were even born into this debt slavery system and never escaped from it. It took federal investigations like the 1940s Department of Justice busts, and even then, it still kept going underground into the 60s. Rebranded slavery is what it was giving. So yeah, I mean, if anyone says that slavery ended, sure babe, but we know the truth. It's just been rebranded as something else. Convict leasing, sharecropping, peonage. It's just under a different name. As always, follow me on IG and You of the Tube under the same username, The Controversial Blonde. And I promise I'll get back to posting regularly again.
I'm going to say this again, and I'm going to keep saying it for you dumbasses. I'm going to keep it plain and simple this time. Slavery is still alive in the United States of America. I keep on telling y'all that, and y'all keep on telling me I'm tripping. Now, if it's under this administration or any other administration, it doesn't matter about the people in office. I'm going to tell you what's happening. I just seen a video of some Haitians in the field picking string beans, right? They do this with Haitians, they do this with Mexicans, they do this with South Americans, Central Americans. It doesn't matter. When immigrants come here, they get promised that they will have shelter and they will get paid by the end of the season for working on the fields, plantations, crops, all of that, right? By the end of the season, they used them for everything that they could use them for while giving them the bare minimum, not even minimum wage, just shelter and food and maybe a few dollars a day. By the end of the season, they call immigration services. Immigration services come and get them. They detain them. They have to work while they're detained. These people are working for America while they're detained. After they ship them out from America, a lot of these times, they don't even ship them back to their country. Abrego Garcia just got sent to Africa. He was born in El Salvador. And not only that, they tried to get rid of not only due process, people can't even prove that they're citizens, but they were trying to get rid of birthright citizenship. These are all facts. This is not a conspiracy. This is not something that you can go against. These are facts. And until y'all wake up and stop trying to fight it, just shut the fuck up.
When a lot of Christians are asked where was God during slavery, most of them deflect from the question. But I can tell you where God was during slavery. God was inside of the people looking outside for God. And that's why I truly believe they introduced this idea of an external God to slaves so that they can look outward for the power. Because had they realized they were God, they could have easily ran over the plantation and called that shit a day. And that's why I say Christianity was a hell of a witchcraft ritual put on black people, because we still have people living in that illusion today. You know why Harriet Tubman was able to escape? Because she wasn't waiting on no savior. She knew it was her power and her divine right, and she took her freedom. She even spoke about how she had to leave some of the scared slaves behind because they were too scared. Nat Turner, you think he was waiting on a savior or an external God? No, he led a whole rebellion because he believed that he deserved to be free. He knew that it was in his power to lead that shit. And the cycle is repeating today because we still have people who are under the mind control of Christianity, and we have those of us who are leaving and paving our own way. And just like Harriet, we're going to have to leave some people behind. It's just what it is. Some people are just in too deep, and taking that communion ritual, it just don't help them. So, we're going to have to leave some people behind. The rest of us, we just got to pave our own way and move forward in our own movement.
So I want to make some clarifications. Technically, The arrival of Christopher Columbus in the Americas in 1492 marks the beginning of modern history. The years before that, 1491 to 500 CE, include all of the recorded medieval histories. All of the years before that, 500 CE to 3000 BCE, include all of the recorded ancient histories. And the reason I say recorded is because it was specifically written down. Prior to the first civilization, which they claim was in Sumer, we didn't have written anything. And the first book that is massively published and produced, coincidentally, is the Gutenberg Bible in 1455. The claim that I'm making is that all of it is history and all of it is a lie. Because it's his story, not ours. And yes, modern history did happen because we can look back and have connections to it by way of our ancestors. But what I'm saying is, if we have no connection to it, it didn't happen. And the stuff that we do have a connection to, that we do know happened, didn't happen in the way that they tell us it happened. We were prisoners of war, not slaves, which means there was no transatlantic slave trade and we didn't come over here by boats. That's my point. Which is to say, we were never slaves. We were prisoners of war, which is a vastly different thing. So, think about that.
Imagine being so desperate to escape slavery that you jumped out of a third-story window, shattering your body but saving your soul. That was Anne Williams. In 1815, Anne Williams was trapped in a Washington, D.C. slave pen with her 3 children. The plan: to ship them south to New Orleans, where families were torn apart and enslaved people faced even harsher conditions. Anne made a choice most people can't even imagine. She hurled herself out of that third-story window. The fall was brutal. Both her arms snapped. Her back broke. She lived, but she would never walk the same again. But here's what slavery didn't expect. Anne's leap didn't just save her from being sold away, it became a symbol. Abolitionist newspapers published an illustration of her shattered body, surrounded by her children. That image spread across the country, across the world, forcing people to confront the raw violence of slavery. Anne Williams became known as the woman who jumped. And even broken, she stood taller in history than the men who tried to own her. Her story is proof resistance has 1,000 faces. Some fight with swords, some with words. Anne fought with her body, and she made the world watch. Drop a heart emoji in the comments if you believe women like Anne Williams deserve to be remembered, not erased. And follow for more unstoppable women they forgot to tell us in schools.
Africans sold Africans. I'm sure you've heard this at one point or another. I sure have.
Africans sold their own into slavery. I hate this comment so much and get it so often, so let's talk about why that statement is both heinous and disingenuous. First, if you read, you'd know that African systems of servitude were fundamentally different from what Europeans created. In many African societies at the time, enslavement was temporary, often results of war, debt, or crime, and people could marry, own property, and even regain freedom. That is nothing like the racialized, hereditary, and dehumanizing system of chattel slavery that Europeans built, a system where black people were treated as livestock, bred for labor, and tortured into submission. And even if Africans were involved in the trade, ask yourself, if someone sold you a person, what would you do? Would you chain them, beat them, rape them, force them to give birth to children you'd also enslave? Because that's what European enslavers did. Not just once, but systematically, by law and for profit. If it were me, I wouldn't buy them or I'd free them. I'd refuse to participate in the destruction of a human soul. But European colonizers didn't just accept the trade, they amplified it, scaled it, and legitimized it with laws, religion, and pseudoscience. So no, saying Africans sold their own isn't a history lesson. It's a deflection. It shifts blame away from the architects of one of the most brutal systems of oppression ever created. When you use that line to downplay or excuse what white enslavers did, you're not being objective. You're defending white supremacy. Whether you realize it or not, you're repeating a narrative designed to absolve the people who built, profited from, and protected the system of chattel slavery for generations.
I'm gonna toss y'all a little nugget. The Africans who sold our ancestors into the transatlantic slave trade were not the same people. That's how they knew to take your ancestors and sell them. They were not all the same people. Your ancestors were of the chosen people of the nation of Israel.
American chattel slavery and the Jewish Holocaust are not the same. So when we bring up slavery, please do not counter that with the Holocaust. It is not the same. To the point that after the Holocaust, the American government and Britain colluded to then allow those Jewish people to go and colonize a whole nother land full of melanated people in true white colonizer fashion. Not just that, American tax dollars have been funding reparations for these people for decades. While America perpetuated slavery, Jim Crow, and a plethora of other oppressive and genocidal acts against American citizens, and no reparations have ever been given. So they are not the same. We don't have to talk about them in the same conversation. Have a good day.
When y'all say that African people sold us into slavery, what it teaches me is three things. One, that you guys don't view us as a diverse set of people with different genotypes and phenotypes, cultures, ethnicities, religions, clans, nationhoods, kingdoms, you name it. You view us as the same people, one race, one monolithic group of people. We all one, we all in the club, we all fam. Like, that's literally how y'all see us. Number two, what it teaches me is that we people in modern times tend to look at history from a 21st century perspective rather than the perspective of the people who were living in those times. And number three, what it teaches me is that a lot of you don't seem to see slavery as something that happened to African people. You think, because you've delineated from Africans and Africa, and rightfully so, you seem to think that Africans are this big bad boogeyman that just rounded up all these people and sold y'all off. When in reality, the average West African and Central African in this day and age is related to the people that were sold, not the people who were doing the selling. The people that were selling slaves were aristocrats, were kings and queens, were chiefs, were people of high status and power, militarily and politically. And there were slave catchers, don't get me wrong. What I'm not going to do is try to pretend as if there weren't average everyday Africans going around capturing people and selling people off for a quick buck or a mirror or some alcohol. I'm not going to sit up here and pretend as if that hasn't happened. But what I'm trying to say here is that the average West and Central African today has ancestors who are related to the people who were sold. They have ancestors who have daughters that were kidnapped. They have ancestors that have husbands, that have wives, that have uncles, that have aunties, that have parents that were sold into the slave trade, that were brutalized, beaten, sexually assaulted, and shipped off to the Americas, never to return again. And I feel like y'all don't realize that because you don't think of slavery as something that happened to African indigenous people. You think of us as separate from your ancestors, when your ancestors are oftentimes related to a lot of West African people in modern day times. Another thing you have to realize is that the black identity is relatively new in history. There was no black identity in Africa. As a whole, we were never all a bunch of black people just betraying each other and selling each other. African indigenous people were at war with each other and were oftentimes selling prisoners of war and were also raiding villages and selling off people after they had won those wars. They were capturing innocent people from their villages and sending them off away. That's literally what was happening, which means that there was no concept of us black people versus white people. There was no us versus them. So there was no sense of loyalty or camaraderie. It was every man for himself.
So I want to respond to this young lady right here, this comment. Now, this is not to attack her, but it is just to highlight how deeply conditioned many of us have been by Christianity and why so many people are rejecting it. Now, what we see in this comment is classic Stockholm syndrome, not just on a personal level, but through collective cultural trauma. Now, in this comment, she says that she believes that, the suffering of our ancestors was God's punishment because they worship their own gods. And I told her, my response was, your religion did not exist tens and thousands of years ago, but our ancestors did. So how does it make sense that they were punished for a God, or not serving a God rather, that they did not know, they had no knowledge of, and a God that didn't exist because the text didn't exist. The story of this God had not come to fruition yet. So how could they have been punished? But she still doubled down on her response, and she says they were punished because they didn't follow the God of the Bible. When Black people say things like we were punished because we worship other gods and slavery was a part of God's plan, they're not speaking from a historical context. They are speaking from trauma. It is literally inherited and passed down. This type of logic, instead of blaming the oppressor, you rationalize and you have to come up with a reason. You have to see the suffering as divine. This is Stockholm syndrome. They internalize the suffering as necessary, and this creates a sense of loyalty to this God. But this thinking did not just start. This is passed down, as I said before, even throughout slavery. The slave masters would actually teach this. They would tell the slaves that they were wicked people, that they had to be punished, that they were doing this because God told them to. They gave them slave Bibles. And the slaves begin to internalize these teachings, and they actually begin to believe it. They begin to think that their slave masters were God ordained. A lot of the slaves began to defend their slave masters. When they would die, they would mourn their deaths because their minds were conditioned. Dr. Joy DeGroy, she calls it post-traumatic slave syndrome. It is the lingering generational trauma that is still showing up today, especially through religion. So when you hear people like this say, if it were not for slavery, we would not know God, these are coping mechanisms. They are trauma responses. This is not some type of spiritual insight. It is a loyalty that was programmed through pain and through domination.
Commenting about the Ukrainians, and they were saying, yeah, but these people are literally, if they go back there, they could die and stuff. We could die as well. I told them that my father wasn't alive and we had to escape, and they were laughing about it. We're saying, yeah, well, we all have problems, but they were defending the white people. And what I'm trying to say is like we don't want you to defend us. You don't have to defend us. It's okay. You guys have your own problems. I'm just telling you about history, what happened, how Mexicans helped the black slaves, how a lot of Mexicans got killed as well, saving them, how we have always stand.
So now that Trump is doing like the mass deportation, this Mexican woman, and I've seen a few other Mexicans saying that Black people needed to help them and stand in solidarity with them. This is not our fight. And she's talking about how the Mexicans helped the Black slaves and how they were killed and on the front lines. First of all, we don't even have to go back in history. We already have a lot of issues in our community that we have to face daily and that we're marching for, going to Congress about, trying to get bills passed. We don't have any allies. So we don't even got to talk about slavery. What about now? I don't see the Mexican community rallying behind Black people. I just don't see it, not by the droves. I'm not going to say on an individual level and on an individual basis, there are some of you that may, help. But this is not our fight. Don't. You see how they come and recruit us when they need help and when they need numbers? But when we need help and when we need numbers, we're just another nigga on the street. Like, come on, they a lot of these Latinas, they be racist too. Okay? I've been to Mexico and I've seen Mexicans that were dark as me. They don't get the representation in the media. We only see the lighter complected ones. Colorism is rampant over there too. We could go deep, but Black people, stand down. I mean, if you want to help, that's up to you, but don't let these people guilt trip you. Not the guilt trip. What y'all think about this? Do we owe the Mexicans anything? It's relevant to Brooklyn Lane.
I think I might be the only millennial that doesn't give a fuck about not owning anything. I have expanded my consciousness enough to realize that ownership and slavery are literally the same thing, even though it isn't being possessive of a person. It is simply being possessive of a thing. And here in the United States, this country was built off of ownership, which is the reason why this country claims that it is the best country. And we are now seeing how the implications under ownership it's harmful to everyone, because This country was built off of owning people, which then allowed that to be transferred to owning things, which is then another form of slavery, because to be able to keep these things that you own, you must then pay money. And in order for you to pay that money, you must then work a job, which in turn creates you to be a slave. You are just a slave to a system that is running for profit when you are not making any. You're literally just working day in and day out as a slave to own something. And the more I realize this, the less I want to own something, because most people are trying to free themselves. That's why they say financial freedom. Well, the opposite of being free is you being a slave. It's you being shackled to something. It's you getting your paycheck and having to split that paycheck up in parts for your survival. Not for your enjoyment, not for your leisure, but literally for your survival. And then not to mention that you are trading in your time to do labor for said survival. I am at the point in my journey spiritually, I don't desire to own anything. And when I used to own things, and that was probably the most unhappiest I ever was in my life. And I think this is why for a lot of boomers have this grandiose, narcissistic way about themselves, because they were the first to be pioneered into this very systematic.
Hello, brothers and sisters. Welcome back to the channel. I'm hoping that you're doing great from wherever you watch me from. I'm your host and presenter, Agent Stories. I want to touch more on the topic white deflection. Oftentimes, when you hear white people argue out, they'll definitely convince you, because they know how to convince you real well. And you'll fall for their convincing power, because at the end of the day, that's what they're good at. And you've seen from the clips how they tried to defend themselves, quote unquote. They tried to deflect from the reality. And this is how white deflection operates. White deflection operates through historical amnesia. Remember, schools and mainstream media have long sanitized or distorted the history of slavery. It presenting it as a regrettable but a distant event rather than foundation of American capitalism and democracy. This selective memory has allowed white Americans to enjoy the fruits of systems created by enslaved labor, that's land, economic stability, political power, without feeling morally implicated. Also, when the full truth is obscured, guilt is replaced by ignorance, and ignorance builds indifference or breeds indifference. The psychological comfort of forgetting becomes more valuable than the moral duty of remembering. Another key factor that I want to touch about is individualization, and this happens in the fact that reducing collective responsibility to isolated personal acts. Remember that white people often say that I wasn't there, or my family didn't own slaves, as though slavery's benefits were confined to a few southern plantation owners. You understand that in reality, the entire white social order profited. That's northern banks financed slavery, white workers benefited from racial job hierarchies, and federal policies after emancipation ensured white economic dominance. Now, this collective benefit continues through inherited wealth, favorable housing policies, and social networks. By individualizing guilt, white people avoid confronting the structural inheritance of racial privileges that still advantage them until today. Also, I want to talk about how white deflection manifests itself. Remember that it also manifests itself through moral inversion. I'll explain. Now, this involves turning the conversation around to make white people appear as victims. That's what we call moral inversion. When discussions of slavery and reparations arise, many claim that they are being blamed for the things they didn't do, or such conversations create division. This tactic reframes accountability as persecution, redirecting empathy away from the descendants of enslaved and towards white, discomfort. It is a psychological reversal that keeps the moral spotlight of white complicity and places it on black activism, which is then portrayed as aggressive or unreasonable at the same time. In addition to that, you need to understand that white deflection thrives in cultural myth making. Yes, the belief that America is a land of freedom and opportunity, where anyone can succeed without hard work. This myth erases the fact that black labor built that freedom while being denied its benefits. When white people embrace the narrative of self-made success, they effectively rewrite history to portray themselves as a moral achievers rather than beneficiaries of systemic theft. The American dream, in this sense, becomes a tool of denial, hiding the nightmare that built it. On the same talk is that there is also a deep psychological element of guilt avoidance at play. Now, to fully accept responsibility for slavery's legacy, this would mean acknowledging that white wealth and comfort exists on the foundation of black suffering. The truth is unbearable for many, so they retreat into denial, silence, and, shallow forms of non-racist rhetoric that do not change or do not challenge the system itself. They may also say slavery was wrong, but resist any conversation about reparation, systemic change, or dismantling white privilege. The avoidance protect the identity as good people while leaving the underlying injustice untouched. So brothers and sisters, please let me know what you think and feel about this video. But until then, let me see you on my next video. Peace, love, and harmony. Salute.